job listing sat on the university's internal board for 11 days before I saw it. In the world of library science, that's an eternity. Most cataloging positions fill in 48 hours, but this one was different. It was for Calvary University, a quiet mid-tier school in Pennsylvania with a secret they had kept behind a fire door for 20 years. They called it the East Wing. It had been sealed since 2005, officially due to structural concerns. 40,000 volumes were left to rot in the dark. I was hired to go in alone, catalogue the forgotten collection, and prepare a grant application. To me, it was just a hazard premium, $12,000 above market rate for working in the dust. I didn't realize that some doors are sealed not to keep people out, but to keep their contents unsearchable. The work began normally enough. I catalogued 80 books a day, standard periodicals, old atlases, science journals. But then, the architecture started to lie. The building plan said the wing was 9,000 square feet. Yet every day, the rows of shelves felt longer. Then I found the books, a 1979 meteorology journal that, inside, described rock formations of a world I didn't recognize, a statistical yearbook for Pennsylvania that listed counties that don't exist, measuring subsurface fluid exchange rates. And then there was the light. On the second floor, the fluorescent banks flickered on, illuminating rows of books that stretched into an infinite, unlit void where the back wall was supposed to be. I wasn't just organizing a library, I was documenting a glitch in reality. But the real horror wasn't the infinite rows or the impossible books. It was when I checked the university's public catalog, I realized that as I entered these anomalous volumes into the system, they were becoming findable. Faculty members were already searching for the terms I had created. They were using this impossible data in their research, leaking the contents of the East Wing into the real world through my descriptions. I wasn't just a librarian. I was a bridge. I was making the unthinkable accessible. Stay with me until the end. Because you need to understand, sometimes doing your job with perfect accuracy is the most dangerous thing you can do. The rows are growing, the door is open, and I don't think there's a back wall anymore. So I stopped cataloging. Not permanently, not dramatically. I just closed the laptop at 2:14 on a Wednesday afternoon, rode the book truck back to the entrance, and walked out through the fire door into Harker Hall, where a sophomore was arguing with a circulation clerk about a recalled interlibrary loan. The normalcy of it was so aggressive, it almost felt like a rebuke. I stood there for a moment, holding my key card, smelling the difference between the air in the East Wing and the air in the main building. The main building smelled like coffee and synthetic carpet cleaner. The East Wing smelled like paper and something faintly mineral, like wet limestone, though I'd never consciously registered that until I had something to compare it to. I walked to the public catalog terminal near the front entrance. I'd already seen the search logs once, but I'd been panicked that first time, scanning fast, looking for confirmation of something I was afraid of. Now I wanted to be methodical. That's what I know how to do. I sat down and I queried every subject heading I had created for the anomalous volumes, all 89 of them as of that week, and I pulled the search history for each one. The first anomalous record I'd created was on March 29th. I remembered this because it was the false meteorology journal, the 1979 volume with the rock formation descriptions, and I'd spent almost 40 minutes on it trying to decide what subject headings to assign to content that didn't correspond to any existing Library of Congress term. I'd improvised. I'd used a combination of standard geological headings and a local subject term I'd coined, unverified geological survey data, because the cataloging rules require you to describe the content you're holding, not the content the cover claims to contain. The first search for that term, unverified geological survey data, occurred on April 2nd, 4 days after I'd created it. The search was conducted by a user account registered to Dr. Lena Voss, Department of Geology. I pulled her profile again, this time reading it carefully instead of skimming. She'd been at Calvary since 1998. Her listed research interests were sediment transport dynamics and Appalachian Basin stratigraphy. Normal, productive. She'd published 61 papers in her career, and I'd looked at enough of them the first time to notice the pattern. The co-authored papers in obscure journals on topics unrelated to her field. But I hadn't looked at the dates. I looked at the dates now. Lena Voss had published in her normal field consistently from 1998 through 2005. Then, from 2005 to the present, she continued publishing in her normal field at the same rate, but the anomalous, co-authored papers stopped completely. They stopped the year the East Wing was sealed, and they resumed. I checked this 3 times to make sure. They resumed in April of this year, the month I started creating catalog entries. I checked the other 5 faculty accounts. Same pattern, every one of them. Anomalous publications flowing steadily through the 90s and early 2000s, then a dead halt in 2005, then a restart within weeks of my first entries. The East Wing had been sealed and the pipeline had been cut. I had been hired to reconnect it. The grant application was real. I'd seen the paperwork, but the grant application was not the reason I was there. The grant application was the reason they could put on paper. I left the terminal and went outside and sat in my car and thought about this for a long time. Here is what I want you to understand about the way I thought about it, because it matters. I was not frightened. I want to be honest about that. I had been frightened on the 3rd floor when the rows extended past the light in both directions and I could no longer see the entrance wall. That was a physical, spatial fear. The fear of being inside something larger than its container. But this, the discovery of the pipeline, the faculty searches, the publication pattern, this didn't frighten me. It clarified something. And clarity, even when what it reveals is bad, has a calming effect on a certain kind of mind. Mine, apparently. What I felt was professional. I felt like a person who has been doing a job competently and has just discovered that the job has a second set of specifications she wasn't given. Not a secret purpose, a client requirement that was omitted from the scope of work. This is something that happens in contract cataloging more often than you think. A library hires you to process a collection, and halfway through you realize they actually need you to weed it, or to reclassify it into a different system, or to build a finding aid for a donor who wants to track their gift. The scope shifts. You adapt or you walk. I did not walk. And I want to tell you why, because the reason is the part of this that I think about most. I did not walk because I was not finished. Not in the sense that the project was incomplete, though it was. In the sense that the catalogue I had built was half a structure, 1,100 records on 3 floors, linked by citations I had traced and subject headings I had created, forming a network of descriptions that made the East Wing's contents navigable. But navigable is not the same as comprehensible. Anyone searching my catalogue could find individual volumes. What they could not do yet was see the shape of the whole collection. The way the first floor described systems, the second floor described processes acting on those systems, and the third floor described outputs. That architecture was visible to me because I had built the catalogue in order, shelf by shelf, floor by floor. It was not visible in the catalogue itself. The records were individual points. The structure connecting them existed only in my head. If I walked away, the catalogue would remain. The records would be searchable. The faculty would continue finding individual volumes and extracting individual data points and feeding them into publications that I could not evaluate because I do not have expertise in geology or mathematics or music theory or any of the fields those 6 people worked in. They would use my catalogue the way you use any catalogue, as a tool for finding specific things. And the thing about a catalogue that lets you find specific things without showing you the whole collection is that it lets you use a library without understanding it. That is, in fact, what catalogues are designed to do. They are tools of access, not tools of comprehension. I had built exactly what I was trained to build, and it was being used exactly as catalogues are used. And the result was that the contents of the East Wing were entering the world in pieces through 6 keyholes, with no one outside those 6 people, and possibly no one including those 6 people, holding a picture of the complete structure. I went back in the next morning, but I changed what I was doing. I stopped cataloguing new volumes. Instead, I went back to my existing records, all 1,100 of them, and I began adding something that the standard cataloguing rules do not require, and that no one had asked me to create. I began adding relational notes, links between records, not just the citations that the books themselves contained, but structural annotations describing how each volume related to the volumes around it, what it continued, what it contradicted, what it assumed as input, what it produced as output. I was building a map, not of the wing, which I could not map because its geometry was unreliable, but of the collection, of the intellectual structure of what was on the shelves. This is not standard practice. In cataloguing, we describe items individually. We do not editorialize about the relationships between items. That's the job of the researcher, the scholar, the person who comes to the collection with a question. The cataloger's job is to make things findable, not to tell you what you found. I was violating a professional norm that I had followed for my entire career, and I was doing it because I had realized that the professional norm was, in this specific case, the mechanism of the problem. A catalogue that describes items without describing their relationships is a catalogue that enables extraction without context. It lets you take pieces without seeing the whole. And the whole, whatever it was, mattered. I was sure of this. Not because I understood what the whole was. I didn't, and I still don't. But because the collection had been structured by someone, the original donor, the dead faculty member whose name I will not say, and that structure was the only thing about the East Wing that behaved like a human artifact. The impossible geometry was not human. The self-rearranging shelves were not human. The content of the anomalous volumes, with their descriptions of systems and processes and outputs in language stripped of all authorial identity, was not human. But the organization, the way the 3 floors built on each other, the way the citations created a reading order, the way the material progressed from descriptive to procedural to predictive, that was a curriculum. Someone had designed it to be encountered in sequence. And my catalog, as originally built, destroyed that sequence by making every volume individually findable, regardless of its position in the structure. I worked on the relational notes for 3 weeks. During that time, I did not attend my check-ins with Dale. He emailed me twice. The first email asked if everything was going well. The second email, 4 days later, said that the grant team had noticed my cataloging output had dropped to 0 and asked if there was a technical problem with the system. I did not respond to either email. On the 4th day of the 4th week, Dale came into the East Wing. I heard the fire door open on the 1st floor. I was on the 3rd floor. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. 2 flights, slow, deliberate. The steps of a person who does not come to this part of the building often. He pushed through the stairwell door and stood at the entrance to the 3rd floor and looked at me across a distance that should have been 30 feet, but was probably more, because the 3rd floor's proportions had continued to drift during the weeks I'd been working on the relational notes. I was deeper in than I'd ever been. My workstation was surrounded by shelf rows on all sides, and the entrance was a bright rectangle far behind me, and Dale was a silhouette in that rectangle. He didn't come closer. He called to me. He said my name, and then he said, "What are you adding to the records?" I told him. I described the relational notes, the structural annotations, the map I was building inside the catalog. I used professional language. I explained my reasoning clearly. I said that a catalog of individually described items without relational context enabled piecemeal extraction, and that the collection's internal structure suggested it was designed to be encountered as a unified curriculum, and that my annotations would make that structure visible to any user, not just to me. He was quiet for a long time. The fluorescence hummed. Somewhere, deep in the rows behind me, I heard the faint sound that the books make when the shelves resettle, a soft collective exhalation, like a deck of cards being squared. Then he said, "That's not what you were hired to do." I said I knew. He said, "The grant team needs an item-level inventory. That's a deliverable. The relational notes aren't part of the scope." I said I knew that too. He said, "Lena Voss called me yesterday. She said her searches are returning different results than they were a month ago. She said the records she's finding now have contextual information that's changing how she reads the source material. She said 2 of her graduate students accessed the catalog independently and came to her with questions about cross-references between volumes in geology and volumes in music theory that they found through your annotations. She wants to know who authorized the relational notes." I said no one had authorized them. Dale took 1 step into the 3rd floor. Just 1. Then he stopped, and I saw him look past me into the rows, and I saw his face change. Not dramatically, a tightening around the eyes, a shift in the way he held his weight, like someone who has just felt the floor give slightly and is deciding whether to trust it. He had not been on the third floor before. I was certain of this. Whatever Dale knew about the East Wing, he knew it administratively, from reports and building plans and the second-hand accounts of the people who had used the collection before the ceiling. He had not stood in the space where the shelves went on past the light and the back wall did not exist. He said, "How far back does it go?" I said I didn't know. He said, "You've been in here for 5 months." I said yes. He said, and I am quoting this as exactly as I can remember it, "The person before you lasted 3 weeks. The person before that lasted 8 days. We've been trying to staff this position since 2022. You're the first one who stayed long enough to build anything." I hadn't known there were others. I thought about the 11 days the listing sat on the board. I thought about the salary. I thought about my own unremarkable resilience. My ability to sit in a room and do a task for hours without needing it to mean anything more than the task itself. I thought about how that trait, which I had always considered mundane, was apparently the rare thing the job required. Not courage, not curiosity, not psychological damage that the wing could exploit, just the capacity to keep working. Dale said, "I'm going to ask you to stop adding the relational notes." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the collection is supposed to be used in pieces. That's how it works. Individual researchers find individual materials relevant to their individual questions. They don't see the whole structure. They're not supposed to see the whole structure." I said, "Who decided that?" He said, "I don't know. It's been policy since before I was hired. The wing was unsealed on the condition that the catalog would be item level only. No relational metadata, no structural annotations, no finding aid. The grant team wants an inventory, not a map." I said, "The collection is a curriculum. Someone built it to be read in order." Dale looked at me, and his expression was not hostile and not afraid. It was the expression of a person who has been managing something larger than himself for a long time and has made peace with the management and has just encountered someone who has not. He said, "I know." Then he said, "That's why the relational notes have to come out." He left. I heard him descend the stairs. I heard the fire door close. I sat at my workstation and I looked at the catalog on my laptop. 1,100 records, 418 of which now contained relational annotations that linked them to other records and described their position in the collection's intellectual architecture. The annotations were already in the system. They were already searchable. Lena Voss's graduate students had already found them. The map was already partially visible. Dale had asked me to remove them. He had not ordered me. He had not threatened my employment. He had asked, and his asking had the quality of a request made by someone who knows he cannot enforce it and is hoping professional courtesy will be enough. I want to tell you what I did, but first I want to tell you what I understood, because the understanding is the part that doesn't leave. The East Wing collection was not a library. It was an instrument. It had been designed by the original donor, by the dead faculty member, by whoever or whatever had supplied the anomalous volumes with their impossible content, to distribute information in fragments. Each fragment was usable, Each fragment was, within its own frame, true and valuable and productive. The 6 faculty members who accessed it were not being deceived. They were finding real data, real methodologies, real frameworks that genuinely advanced their research. The publications they produced were not fraudulent. The influence the provost in 2005 had identified as outsized and unaccountable was real scholarly output based on real source material. The East Wing was not a trap, it was a distribution system. And the design of that system required that no single user see the whole. Not because the whole was dangerous. I had been immersed in it for months, and I was fine. I was functional. I was the same person I'd been in March. But because the whole would change what the pieces meant. A geological dataset extracted in isolation is a geological dataset. The same geological dataset understood as one output of a process described on the 2nd floor, which operates on a system described on the 1st floor, which connects through citations to datasets in music theory and civil engineering and comparative literature. That's not a geological dataset anymore. That's a coordinate in a structure whose purpose becomes visible only when you hold enough coordinates at once. The relational nodes I had built were a lens that brought those coordinates into alignment. Not for me, for anyone who searched the catalog. I had built a tool that turned the East Wing from a distribution system into a legible document, and I had done it because legibility is what catalogers create, and I had not considered that legibility might be exactly what the system was designed to prevent. Or, and this is the other possibility, the one I can't dismiss, I had built exactly what the collection was waiting for. Not what the university wanted, not what Dale wanted, not what the 6 faculty members wanted, what the collection itself, in its impossible architectural inhuman patience, had been waiting 20 years for. A person who would stay long enough and work carefully enough to describe not just the pieces, but the connections. A person who would build the map. I sat on the 3rd floor and I thought about these 2 possibilities, and I could not determine which one was true. And I understood that I could not determine this because the information I would need to distinguish between them was the information contained in the parts of the collection I had not yet reached. The answer was deeper in the rows, past the light, in the space where the back wall should be and isn't. I did not go deeper. I did not remove the relational notes. I did not catalogue any new volumes. I sat at the workstation for the rest of the day doing nothing. And then I went home and fed my cat and checked the tire pressure on my Subaru and went to bed. The next morning, I drove to campus and parked in the East Lot and looked up at Harker Hall and at the East Wing with its painted over slit windows and its flat institutional roof and its 9,000 square feet of exterior containing God knows how many square feet of interior. And I made a decision. I went to the main library catalog terminal. I logged in with my staff credentials. I opened the batch editing interface, which I had access to because I was the cataloger of record for the entire East Wing collection. And I added one more field to every single record I had created. All 1,100, anomalous and normal alike. A note in the cataloger's field, which is visible to staff but not to public users, which said, "This record is part of a structurally interconnected collection. Item-level consultation without contextual review is not recommended. C. Cataloger for relational framework. Then I went into the staff access settings and I changed the relational notes from public visible to staff only. The graduate students who had already found them would still have their printouts, their notes, their questions, but new searches from patron accounts would return item-level records only, exactly as Dale had asked. The relational annotations were still in the system. The map still existed, but it was behind a permissions wall, visible only to people with staff-level catalog access, and the only person at Calvary University with both staff-level catalog access and an understanding of what the annotations meant was me. I became the index to my own index. I went back to cataloging new volumes that afternoon. I resumed the work I'd been hired to do. Item-level records, standard subject headings, no relational metadata in the public-facing fields. The grant team got their inventory numbers. Dale got his deliverable. Lena Voss's searches returned clean, individual records that she could extract from without context, exactly as the system's design intended. But inside the staff layer, underneath the surface catalog, the map continued to grow. Every new record I created, I also annotated. Every connection I found, I documented. Every citation that linked a first-floor system to a second-floor process to a third-floor output, I traced and recorded in a field that no patron would ever see unless I showed it to them. The public catalog was a distribution system. My catalog, the real one, the hidden one, the one that lived in the staff-only fields, was a document. I'm aware that I have done something that may not be reversible. The public catalog, the item-level one, has now been accessed by 31 user accounts across 9 departments. The publications are accelerating. I track them. I read every one. They are good papers. They advance real knowledge in real fields, and each one uses a piece of the East Wing's collection without knowing what it's a piece of. Each one is a sentence extracted from a paragraph, extracted from a chapter, extracted from a book that no one but me is reading in order. I don't know what the book says. I have not finished it. The third floor continues beyond the light, and I have not followed it because following it is not my job. My job is to describe what I can reach accurately and completely, and to build a structure of description that preserves the relationships between the things I describe. That is what a cataloger does. That is all a cataloger does. But I think about the permissions wall. I think about the fact that I am the only person who can see the map, and that this means I am the only person who could show it to someone else, and that this means the decision about whether the whole structure ever becomes visible is mine, not Dale's, not the provost's, not the 6 faculty members. Mine, because I built the map and I control the permissions, and the map is in a system that I administer. I think about the dead faculty member who donated the collection in 1983. I think about the fact that someone, that person, or something working through that person, designed a curriculum that was meant to be encountered in sequence and then placed it inside a library, which is a system designed to break sequences into individually retrievable units. The collection was built to be read as a whole and housed in an institution that guarantees it will be read in pieces. That tension is not an accident. It is the engineering. The East Wing works because libraries work the way they do. The distribution happens automatically through the normal function of catalogs and search terminals and researchers following citations. No conspiracy is required, no manipulation. Just a collection in a library and a cataloger doing her job. The question I carry home every night, the one that sits in the passenger seat of my Subaru and follows me into my apartment and watches me feed my cat, is whether building the hidden map makes me a safeguard or a single point of failure. Whether I am the person who will one day be able to show someone the whole picture, or whether I am the lock on a door that only stays closed as long as I choose not to open it, and whether there is actually a difference between those two things. The routes go on. I go back each morning. The work is mine, and it is good, and I do not know what it is for, and the catalogue grows in both its layers, the public one that feeds the machine and the private one that describes the machine, and I am the seam between them. I don't know how this ends. I know how tomorrow starts. I badge in through the fire door. I take the stairs to 3. I pull the next book off the shelf. I open it. I describe what I find. And in the staff-only field, in the hidden layer, in the map that no one else can see, I write down where it fits. The back wall is not there. The rows are not finished. The catalogue is not complete. I am a librarian. This is what I do.